Number 1. Strange interview. I have to start out by saying right away that I am rather happily employed. I make decent money and my family is very well taken care of. Unfortunately, however, this was not always the case. This story happened near the beginning of the Great Recession. I am sure a lot of people can remember how bad things were back then. I worked as a facilitator in a call center company. Greater than my entire job was training people about how to work on the phones. It was a 3-week course for each class, and once it was done, it started over with a new class. So, the company decided not to use full-time facilitators anymore. Apparently, they considered us a money drain. So, what they did instead was use call center workers in the summer and fall to do the training. They were paid less than we were and didn't get a bonus for doing the training, so off we went. I had severance for a few months, but that was hardly a comfort. I had children and I needed to find a job in order to take care of them. And everyone was cutting employees, not hiring them, so I was not having any luck in finding a job. When I was in the parking lot of a grocery store, a somewhat friend of mine came over to talk to me. She was one of those annoying people who always trapped you in a conversation and wouldn't let go. Plus, she was really weird and into some shady things. I knew that she sold drugs on the side because she had offered me some every now and then. Of course I declined and she stopped talking about it. She asked me if I had found a new job yet. I told her that I did not. And it was getting a bit difficult as the severance money was running out. I had no idea what I was going to do if I couldn't find a job before that and my savings were depleted. That is when she told me that she might be able to help me find a job. I was dubious about it because of her history and insisted that I didn't want to do anything illegal. She assured me that it wasn't anything like that. She took out a piece of paper with a phone number on it and told me just to call that number and to mention that she was the one who told me to call. And then, for the first time ever, she left the talk before I did. It was weird and I really didn't trust her. But after a while, I decided that it couldn't hurt to just try out the number and see what was going on. So I called and someone picked up on the second ring. They said the name of the business and asked how they could help me. I gave them all the information that my friend had given me and they told me they could set up an interview the next day. I was given an address and they hung up the phone. I was quite excited because it seemed legit and I really hadn't expected it to be. I would be able to go to the interview immediately after I had dropped the kids off at school. I didn't have a GPS or anything, so I had to find the place on my own. I drove and when I was getting closer, I realized that this was in a rather seedy part of town. In fact, it was an area with a lot of industrial buildings that had been closed down. Therefore, there were no car or anything in the area. I kept checking the addresses, trying to find the right one. Eventually, I found it because I recalled the name of the company. But it was weird to me because there were no cars in the parking lot at all. I guessed to myself that maybe the employees parked in the back. Plus, I didn't think much of it, because the business could definitely be running even with the other closed ones in the area. I got parked in what was marked a spot for guests. And then I got out of the car. I walked up to the building, but as I did, I started to get very nervous. It didn't look like anyone was in the building, and it was scary walking up to it like this. I walked up to the door and opened it. It was unlocked, and at first, I breathed a sigh of relief. I was thinking I had been sent to a closed building. I went in. My relief quickly left me. There was no one at the reception desk. There were not any lights on, and the place was definitely deserted. I walked over to the elevator, pushing the button. Maybe the reception area was closed, but the place I was supposed to work at was open, I asked myself. But there was no power and the elevator did nothing. I stood there for a moment, not sure what I was going to do. And that's when I heard it. I heard a really odd voice saying something, but I couldn't make it totally out. It seemed to be coming from the staircase by the elevators. So I decided to go and open the door and hear what was being said. I opened the door and immediately wished that I hadn't. A loud, scary voice was chanting over and over, "It's for you, Lord. Come to me, Lord. It's for you, Lord. Come to me, Lord." The voice was coming from down the stairs in the basement of the building. I was frozen for a moment, but then decided to close the door quietly. I didn't know what was going on in that basement, but it had nothing to do with a job interview. I intended to walk out of the building quietly, but my fear got the best of me. I ran out of the building and got into my car. As I was driving out, I noticed several people standing in front of the building, watching me leave. They weren't dressed like business people, though. They were wearing like ceremonial robes or something. They just watched me as I left, speeding away from this freaky sight. When I got home, I went to call my friend who had suggested that I go there. She didn't answer the phone. She didn't return my message. Number 2, playground. I work out a lot. I have always been really obsessed with keeping fit. I have also had training in wrestling and some martial arts. Although I don't particularly like the idea of fighting, I think I could do more than hold my own in a fight. This is pretty important to know because it makes my story that much scarier. Now, this happened in the fall, so of course the sun had been setting a whole lot earlier. I like to get out and jog right before the sunset because it was nice to watch the fall sunset. So, I was jogging and I decided to cut through this park. It was a pretty big area with a path running through the forest. And when you came out of the forest, the path went by a big field with children's playground equipment in the middle of the field. When I was running past the playground, I stopped to get a look at the sunset. And when I did, I noticed that there was a kid in the playground. They looked pretty young and I thought it was weird that they were out so late. I was about to just start jogging again when I noticed something else. Some strange-looking man was standing outside of the playground. He moved forward a little bit and leaned against the swing set for a while. I don't know why I stood there and watched, but there was something about the guy that made me feel pretty uneasy. I wasn't sure if he saw me or not, because his back was facing me the whole time. But he hadn't been in the playground when I first showed up, so I doubted that he was the parent of the child. The man walked up to the kid. They looked like they were talking. I noticed the kid back off a little from the man, and the kid looked a bit scared. So I began to get a little concerned, but didn't do anything quite yet. However, the kid stood up and then began to back away from the man. I thought I would go up to them and see what was wrong. So I began lightly jogging up to the playground. After a moment, however, the man grabbed the kid by the arm. The kid was doing his best to struggle and move away, but the man had a good grip on him. That is when the kid began yelling and I realized this person was either an abusive parent or a child abductor. Either way, I knew I had to act fast. I ran up to the guy and grabbed the arm that was holding the kid. I jerked his arm away and the kid got loose and fell to the ground. I twirled the guy around so that he was facing me. I got a good look at the guy and he was a scary looking man. He was thin, pale, and looked like he hadn't washed his greasy hair in a long time. It was nasty looking, but the worst part were his eyes, which looked totally crazed. The man, who was much smaller than me, jumped on me and tried to knock me over. I was surprised because I was much bigger than him, but he succeeded in tackling me to the ground. The guy was abnormally strong and the fight was one of the hardest ones I ever had in my life. He kept yelling something about needing the blood and all. Finally, however, I was able to subdue him by getting him on his stomach and holding his arms behind his back with my left hand and my knee. I tossed my cell phone over to the kid and told him to call 911. He didn't hesitate to do so. I held the struggling man down until the police arrived. They took over and arrested him, but that's not the end of the story. I was there when the kid was talking to the cops and the story he told them was scary. The kid told the police that the man approached him, asking to play a game. The kid was immediately put off. He didn't want to play with a stranger, especially a stranger as freaky as this guy was. When the kid backed off, the man grabbed him and started growling at the kid, telling the kid that he keeps seeing the scary things. He told the kid that he needed to drain his blood in order to take care of the visions. The guy was on some pretty serious drugs and he was also mentally ill. He suffered from schizophrenia and the drugs made it worse. He was on PCP. It was the first time I had ever been around someone who was on PCP. It also explains how the little man was able to put up a good fight with me. It chilled me to think about the fight after that, because who knows what he could have done to me if he had won the fight. But most fortunately, the kid was alright. He wasn't too freaked out about the whole thing, and that is most important. Number 3. Night home. I am not completely sure if these two events are related, but they might be. I had an extremely messy breakup with a girl when I was in my 20s, which was a long time ago. It was like something you would see out in a movie. We yelled and screamed, called names, and threw things at each other. It ended with her and me screaming as she left the house. I was at the door and screaming back as she walked to her car and supposedly drove her way out of my life. I didn't hear from her for the rest of the week. In fact, I was relieved that I didn't. I knew it would just lead to more drama and stuff. I was just hoping that everything would get back to normal and I would never see her again. So it was on the weekend when I was home by myself that I had an experience that part of my thinks was instigated by her. I had gotten home pretty late on a Saturday night, after having been out at the bars with some friends of mine. I wasn't ready to go to bed though, so I decided to keep having a few drinks in my home. Hey, I knew that I was going to pay for it in the morning, but that was fine with me at the time. I had my television beside the window that faced out in my living room. That way, I could just look over and always see what was going on outside. Not that much was actually going on ever. but if it was, I would know it. I guess you could also say I am paranoid, and if I am watching TV and someone comes to the door, I want to be able to see who it is before they get here. But normally, I don't pay much attention if I see someone walking on the sidewalk in front of my house. It's normally just kids that do it, but this night, I did notice someone walking by. And it was because the guy was pretty big and rather scary looking as well. He was also overly dressed for what the weather was like. But really got my attention was that he looked over at my house. I wasn't sure if he could see me or not, but I sure could see him. But after the glance over to my house, he kept walking on his way. I really put him immediately out of my head. I went back to watching TV for a little while, feeling that I wanted another drink. I got up and went in the kitchen. There was a sliding glass door facing my backyard. I normally don't pay much attention to the backyard, but when I turned out the lights, I don't know why, but I glanced into the backyard. At first, I couldn't make out what I saw, but I knew that it looked like someone or something was in my backyard. It was a shadowy figure. For a few moments, I thought that it might be my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark. So I walked up closer to the window to get a better look. I couldn't turn my porch light on because the bulb was out. I was looking and then realized that there was indeed someone in my backyard. They were standing far enough back in the dark that I couldn't see them clearly. But it looked like a big man, and my mind went back to the man I had seen walking in front of my house. He must have realized that I had seen him because he began moving quickly toward my door. The door was fortunately closed, but it wasn't locked. So I had to move quickly to flick the lock switch. I fortunately did before the guy got to the handle. At this point, I was able to get a look at the guy. He was huge and was wearing a black jacket. His jacket opened as he moved, and I saw a large knife sheathed inside of the jacket. That scared the crap out of me. The man started pulling on the handle of the door. Although it was locked, he was mercilessly pulling on the handle. I was terrified that he might break the lock and get through. I ran into the living room closet and grabbed something in there that I had to protect myself. I kept hearing him pulling on that door handle and eventually heard break the lock and get the door open. He got into my house. I stood in the doorway to the closet as the man came into the house. When I saw him, he had already pulled his knife out of its sheath. But when he saw me, he stopped in his tracks when he saw me pointing my gun straight at his head. "Get the fuck out of my house," I breathed. I was the one suddenly with the more power, but I was terrified. I didn't really know if I could shoot a person. I had never been in a situation to shoot anything other than a target. I just hoped that he didn't hear the fear in my voice. He took one step forward toward me, as if daring me to shoot at him. At that moment, it seemed like my body took over and pulled the trigger. The shot hit the guy in his left arm. He quickly recoiled and yelled in pain. However, he didn't keep still very long, and he got up and ran out of the back door of the house. I actually stood there for who knows how long, still terrified about what happened. I knew I needed to get up and call the police, but I was frozen in place for a while. Finally, I called the police. They looked around and I gave a description of the guy. Interestingly enough, the guy was picked up when he was found lurking behind a convenience store. I actually had to go to the precinct, and there was a lineup, and I was able to identify him. The reason I brought my girlfriend up in the beginning was that she knew this guy. I suspected that she had set this up, but that was never proven, and she was never arrested. But the attacker did get a short jail sentence for aggravated assault.